Good evening and welcome to tonight's virtual program. I'm Emma, one of the librarians here at Rockland Public Library, and we're thrilled to be hosting tonight's talk. I want to start the night off with a couple quick programming notes on upcoming virtual events this month at the library. Next week on April 8th, romance novelist K.D. Fisher will give a reading from their book, The Secret Ingredient, and we'll talk about the daily life of a queer romance writer. And the following week, on April 15th, we'll be showing a virtual film screening of Whose Streets, a documentary about the Ferguson protests and the Black Lives Matter movement. And I'm happy to introduce tonight's speaker. Kevin Johnson earned his bachelor's degree from St. Joseph's University and worked for a number of years as a paralegal before shifting his focus to fine art photography. He earned his professional certificate in photography from the Maine Photographic Workshops, where he first encountered the Eastern Illustrating and Publishing Company's postcard collection. When the collection needed to be rehoused in 2007, the Penobscot Marine Museum bought it into their archive. As the museum's photo archivist, Kevin Johnson has cultivated its current collection into a robust array of works. And I'll turn it over to Kevin. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Em, and thank you everyone for coming out tonight. I wish I could be there with you, in front of you, but I guess we have to take what we can get these days. The museum is scheduled to open on time this year and Memorial Day weekend, and we will start off the season with guided tours and some limited offerings, but we hope as things seem to improve like they are improving that we can be back to our full offerings toward the end of the season in July and August. So we do hope you can come visit. I wanted to give a little bit of background about our photo archives. Not sure how to advance the... Okay, so if you haven't been to the Penobscot Marine Museum or you were here a long time ago, this is how it started back in 1936. It was founded by families here in Searsport with connections to the shipping industry and boat building. And when the museum first started, this was our one building, which had been the Searsport Town Hall and Jail. This is now our fisheries exhibit. And the museum has grown to be a full campus with a dozen buildings and multiple exhibit halls, several old sea captains' homes that are fully furnished back to the day. And then to the left of this building that you see on your screen is our modern library, which is where I'm sitting now, and that houses our photo archives and other collections. A few tidbits about the photo archives here. We have more than 350,000 photographic images. It's unofficially the largest photo archive in the state, and it seems that there are more items coming in all the time. We have an online database, and pretty much everything that I'm going to show you tonight, you could go home and, well, you might already be home, but you can go online and look at our online database and find these images and learn more about them. And we do offer fine art prints and image licensing if you were ever interested. So I'm going to start out talking about the collection that got me into this world, the Eastern Illustrating and Publishing Company collection. Eastern Illustrating, and I've been down to Rockland a few times now to talk about this collection specifically. But Eastern Illustrating was a postcard company that was based in Belfast. It started in 1909 and made real photo postcards up until the 1950s. And then they switched over to color and existed until the 80s. What we have here is primarily the old portion of their archive, which is 50,000 primarily glass plate negatives, taken not just of Maine, but of all over New England and upstate New York. It was started by a Rockland native, Herman Cassins, and that's him standing in front of his automobile. You can see how ambitious he was. He wanted to make Eastern Illustrating go from coast to coast, photographing the transcontinental trail. And he didn't quite pull that off, but we are very fortunate as to what he did. He and his photographers did manage to capture. It's a true photographic survey of New England in the first part of the 20th century. The factory was based in downtown Belfast, across from where McLeod's Furniture is now. And the factory was manned by women, as you can see in this picture, and they did most of the printing and the packaging and filling orders, where the photographers and salesmen were men who traveled around the countryside in the summer seasons. So we're only going to look at a few of the Rockland images, but I thought it would be appropriate to show where we might be if we had gathered together. The beautiful Rockland Library. It looks fairly new in this photograph. Eastern Illustrating used 5x7-inch glass plates for their negatives, and they would actually, when they made a postcard from them, the postcards were 3.5 by 5, so they actually cropped down each image by almost a third. So if you were home and a postcard collector, you might be familiar with some of these images, but you will probably see more of the picture when you see these views of them. Here we're looking at Tilson's Wharf. A few years back, we did an exhibit of Knox County, drawing from this collection, and I learned then that General Davis Tilson was the wealthy owner of the Hurricane Granite Company, and he built this wharf at the end of C Street in 1881. And it's presently the home of the Coast Guard now. This is the Williams Quarry on Old County Road. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. It's probably filled in now. Near the Thomaston border, it was the deepest quarry in the world. And this bridge was the Pleasant Street Bridge. And in 1910, President William Taft visited Rockland and actually stood on this bridge, looking down 400 feet deep and 40 stories into the bottom. Fortunately for him, this was a very strong bridge. Here we see a scene on Route 17 near Lake Chippewa. And of course, the great Samoset Hotel. The Samoset, this was the original one, built in 1890. It has that lovely pavilion down by the water, and you can see the guests out on the lawn playing croquet. The Ricker family of Poland Springs bought the hotel in 1902 and enlarged it and renamed it to be the Sam-O-Set. SAM-O-SET, and added it to their chain of hotels and resorts. It's remained there and active until the 70s, when in 1972 it burned to the ground and then was actually rebuilt to the present day form and still exists today. Here's a shot of downtown Main Street and the famous Thorndike Hotel. We're going to hear a little bit later about Kosti Ruohomaa, but this was one of his favorite watering holes, and would spend many evenings here having drinks. Still looks fairly similar to today. And an early view of the Rankin Block. We'll see an earlier one coming up, but this one shows the trolley line. These trolleys ran from Camden all the way down to Owl's Head and Crescent Beach, and down into Rockport and Oakland Park. It must have been a pretty lively scene as these went clanging through town. The captions that you see on the postcards were actually handwritten by young girls that worked in the postcard factory, and they wrote directly on the negative in black washable ink, and they actually had to write backwards so that in the printing process the lettering would be reversed. And this brings us up a little bit closer to modern times. A 1950s view of Main Street. You can see the Strand Theater down on the right. When they got into the 40s and the 50s, they stopped using the glass plate negatives and switched over to flexible film, but still made the 5x7 sized large format images. And this was the collection that got me into this business. You heard in my bio that I came to the museum with this collection after helping to save it from a flood. that happened at the Maine Photographic Workshops. And since it's been here, we've made great progress and created many exhibits. And in 2016, I got to work with two of my history heroes, Earl Shuttleworth and Bill Bunting, to write this book, Maine on Glass. And also worked with Wiscasset filmmaker Sumner McCain to make The Northeast by Eastern. You may have been lucky enough to see it on MPBN this winter, because they've been showing it regularly. Definitely worth tracking down. My first starring role. So we're going to be looking at a bunch of these collections and just a sampling of each. Many of them I could do the whole program on, but I do like showing the breadth of our collections here, and we have so many great images of Rockland. I thought this would be a great way to share some of them. The next one we're going to look at is Carroll Thayer Barry. You may be more familiar with Mr. Barry as a printmaker. He lived in Rockport. He was an illustrator and a printmaker and a photographer. He was born in 1886 in New Gloucester, Maine, but grew up in Portland and became very infatuated with the sailing ships down there. And he ended up going into the military service. He was down in the Panama Canal and painted the murals that were part of that, that went with that construction. But when he came back to Maine, he became very active in the art community. And here he is now, or here he is then, with his printing press. He was one of the founders of CMCA, and at the time it was called the Maine Coast Artists. And here is their original building. Now I do realize that this is in Rockport and not Rockland, but CMCA now is in Rockland, so I made that connection. This was actually the former firehouse in Rockport. And Barry was friends with the other photographers in the area. He was active in the Camden Photo Camera Club and the Rockland Camera Club. And in 1959, he worked with Kosti Ruohomaa, this is him in this picture, cigarette in hand as usual. And they made a book called The Maine Coastal Portrait. In addition to Carroll Thayer Barry and Kosti, they also were working with Jim Moore. And it's a really neat book. It's kind of hard to find. But apparently they went out together shooting from time to time. What I haven't found is the picture in Kosti's collection, which would have shown Carroll with his camera in hand. Here we see down in Rockland Harbor, this is the steam lighter Sophia, grounded out at the Snow Marine Basin with a small power boat next to her. Barry went around on the windjammers quite frequently and photographed all the time. His collection is quite huge. When I did a search through what we have scanned, I found this amazing photos of a seaplane, and you can see it in the background here in this picture behind this barge-like ship, but several close-up shots. I just found it very impressive. It was the Flying Lobster. Must have been amazing to see that in the air. And this is one of the McClune boats. This is the Silas McClune. This photo was taken in 1948, the same year as those seaplanes, and actually probably just a few minutes after he photographed that seaplane. We'll see a few different lobster smacks from the McClune business. And the last one that we'll look at of Carroll Thayer Barry's is the windjammer Maddie, when she was on the ways at Snow's shipyard being repaired, and also in 1948. Barry donated his collection here in 1977 and actually died the next year. Now the next collection we'll look at is that of Elmer Montgomery. And Elmer was from Rockland and a banker, and significant in that his collection came here by way of his cousin, Maynard Bray. Maynard is a great friend of the museum. and we'll talk about him in a little bit. But Elmer, for a few years, 10 years maybe tops, got really into photography, and he was really, really a good photographer. Here he is building a model of the Red Jacket. Apparently after he went to the war, he didn't photograph much after that, but what he did before that was truly amazing. He had a great sense of the composition and where to stand and what to include and what not to include, and to really capture action when that was the subject. This is an amazing photo of the dragger Pelican in 1939 coming down and being launched. It was christened as the St. George, and this is John Snow's steam tug Sumner's N. Smith is on the railway behind it to the right. Elmer spent a lot of time at the different mid-coast harbors, but most of the time in Rockland. This is a 32-foot motor yacht called the Haggis. What a really cool picture. It was built in 1938 in the loft of the machine shop at Snow's shipyard. And the person with his back to us is Chris Wallace. So much of this information that we know about these photos come from Maynard Bray, who helped write the descriptions for them. Here we have the two Clink schooners, the George E. Clink and the Charles M. Clink. But what a neat photograph. And this, he really abstracts the interior of the ship, but it becomes quite beautiful. This was the St. George that we just saw previously being built. It was designed by Albert Condon. This really shows you what the bones of a ship look like as it's coming together. It was launched, as we said before, in 1939. We saw Lake Chippewaukee a little earlier, and here it is again, but this time in the winter, and where they are harvesting ice from it. Oh, in the Vinyl Haven. So here we see the pilot house of the steamer Vinyl Haven, and it's sunk at the dock. This photo and others that he took of it are quite dramatic, though unfortunately the story is a little less so. It had fallen into disrepair, and it had been tied to the dock in Rockport Harbor. And at this particular time in November of 1938, one of the guardrails caught underneath the dock as the tide was coming in, which held it down and allowed it to fill with water and sink. And they were able to raise it up a couple weeks later, and it was stripped for salvage. And then in July of 1945, it was towed to the Monroe and Sheep Islands and sunk. A sad end to a pretty amazing ship. It was actually coincidentally built in Searsport in 1892. It caught fire almost immediately in 1893 and had to be rebuilt, which was for the better. It got remodeled again in 1905, and at that point got put on the Rockland Vinyl Haven route in 1920. Here we see the launch of the Governor Braun, which was the first car ferry built for Islesboro. This day, it was May 19th of 1936. And the Governor Braun was a 65-foot double-ended wooden-hulled ferry. And she was able to carry 6 cars at this time, which almost immediately proved to be insufficient. And a few years later, actually only a year later, she was cut in half and lengthened by another 20 feet. This is Elmer's brother, Earl Montgomery, with 2 fine horses. Another great photo though. And this photo is a real gem. This is, we saw the first slide that I showed was at the Penobscot Marine Museum in 1936, when it was that one building, and Elmer visited it that first year that it was open in 1938. And this is what it looked like inside. Most of these, obviously, we still have all these artifacts, these half hulls, ship models, paintings. They're not stored in this building anymore, but they are still on our campus, and it's a pretty valuable view to have of this place way back in its early days. Another view in that same time. This is the last photo that I'll show of Elmer's, and this was a dramatic one, as you can see, of a big fire at the Masonic Temple building on Main Street in February of 1940. So next we'll move on and we'll take a look at Don Merchant's collection. This was another collection that came to the museum by way of, probably by way of Maynard. Don and Maynard were close pals ever since 6th grade. They were actually born 2 days apart, but they really connected in 6th grade and really were drawn together by their love of boats. Don's collection, while not huge, is very significant. He and Maynard spent a lot of time down at the Snows Marine Basin. They both were equipped with cameras and captured a very special time in their lives. And they were actually really good photographers, even at that young age. Don's stepfather was Sid Cullen, and he was a freelance photographer for the Courier Gazette. And he later became the editor and bought the newspaper. And so that's where Don got a little bit of his photography education. He had his own darkroom at his house and developed film and made prints. And he had an enlarger in the loft above the barn where he was able to make 4-inch prints. He earned a Boy Scout merit badge in photography, and I think it really shows in some of his images. The camera that he was using was a Kodak Duoflex. What we're looking at here are Don and Maynard would kind of collected boats, and this is a few of their fleet. We're looking down from the mast of the Maggie, which is one of the 2 high points that they had of getting a bird's eye view around the marine basin. And we're looking at the sloops Cuckoo, Brutal Beast, and I'm sorry, this was taken from the Pile Driver, the other tall vantage point. Also, the Alston E is hauled up on the float, and you can see young Maynard working on the Cuckoo's tail. On a Cuckoo's sail, not tail. This would have been in 1950 or 51. But just a beautiful composition, so well seen. This is the Cuckoo in Lemon's Cove with its new mainsail, especially sewn up by Maynard. And he is with Janet Stone in this photograph. Same time period, 1950 or 51. Here they are hauling up the skiff Doofus up to the top of the barge. And you'll see another photo from the barge from a little further back, which shows their fort. These kids were ambitious. And they had quite a playground, something that kids today probably wouldn't be able to get away with, but they did and made the most of it. Here we see Maynard breaking ice in the Alston E. There's the barge in the background that we just saw them hoisting up the Doofus to. And you can see the little tugboat Hugh. And behind the barge, you can see Sophia's stack. and wheelhouse. So here is the bow of the barge. The barge was named Brunette, and it had been built in 1880 in Perth Amboy, New Jersey, but it was derelict at this point in 1948. And Don and Maynard managed to salvage a pilot house from a sardine carrier called the Campobello. And they were able to get the pilot house up on top of this barge and seal it up and made it into a clubhouse. How fitting. They paid a whopping $2 to a Captain Greenlaw for it. I think it was a fine purchase. They had to cut it loose from the old carrier, roll it onto a float, and tow it to get it to here. Quite amazing. And here we see Don Merchant aboard the Nabby at launching, and his friend Morris McCusick to the right. He was approximately 12 years old here in this photo. This is the Texoil approaching McLoon's Wharf, and Green Island Packing can be seen on the left. This was a sardine factory. And the sardine carriers Green Hornet and Neptune's Bride are alongside of it. You just barely see them. Here we see a raft that Don and Maynard built. They gathered debris from Cooper's Beach down in Owl's Head and tied it together, and it lasted, I think, a few voyages before it came apart. But just living the Huck Finn dream. So this photo was taken from the masthead of the Maggie. You have to imagine that these boys' mothers did not really know what they were up to. Hopefully they didn't look at the pictures, because they probably would have wondered how they could have gotten up so high and done it safely. This is a view looking northeast. You can see John Drake's boat on the skidway. There are oak logs on the brow to be sawn for a trap stock. And SMB, Snow Marine Basin in the foreground. Jameson Point with the Samoset Hotel can be seen in the far distance. And another amazing shot. Here they're raising the bows on a Quonset hut, and that's birch snow up on top. The view is looking toward the north, and the large building that you can see was the Crockett Block, near where the Red Jacket was built before Main Street was built up to its present level. Wharf ruins can be seen along the shore. What a great sense of timing to get this and frame it right when Bert's at the high point. Beautiful. And so from Don's collection, we'll move on to Maynard's. I wouldn't doubt that many of you know about Maynard, but he donated his collection back here in, I want to say 6 years ago now, and we've been working on it, though we have a campaign to see it through. We do have several thousand of his images online, but you can see by the total, we have a little ways to go. Maynard's been photographing his whole life. Here we see him behind the wheel of the Victory Chimes as it's being towed from Bucks Harbor to Rockland by the Matinicus mailboat, the Mary A. Maynard was born in Rockland, and his mother was an amateur photographer, and Maynard was able to get hold of her Kodak Jiffy, and so that was his camera of choice. He also had a darkroom in his basement at home and printed his own work. He got his degree in mechanical engineering at University of Maine, and went on to work for Electric Boat and Bath Iron Works before heading down to Mystic Seaport, where he became the shipyard supervisor. He came back to Maine in the 1970s and ended up becoming the technical editor at Wooden Boat magazine, where he still writes his monthly column. And he also writes the captions for Ben Mengewitz's Wooden Boat calendars that come out yearly. And he is one of the people that are producing the videos at Off Center Harbor. He also has helped out with scores of our exhibits, and he is so knowledgeable and such a great caption writer. We are so indebted to all of his knowledge and his photographs. This is the MDI class sloop Pixie, which was one of his first boats. It was later known as the East Wind, and it's hauled out next to his parents' house, or his parents' garage in Rockland in 1954. He and his girlfriend at the time, Ann Tracy, bought the boat in 1953 from Brian Farnsworth of Hall's Cove for $400. And here we see Ann painting the MDI sloop Pixie at the Farnsworth barn in Hall's Cove. Such a great photo. She was a real sweetheart. Here we see the second McLoon of the evening. This is the Mary McLoon. She was a lobster smack, abandoned at this point, but still afloat and tied up to die in Rockland. This would have been about 1947. You can see Don standing on the deck of the boat toward the right. And if you look carefully up above the boat, you can see the boys' bicycles. This is Don Merchant rowing up Lerman's Cove in the Sculling Dragon Lady. It was an abandoned speedboat he fixed up and added a raised foredeck. He had painted her yellow with purple trim. If you're a subscriber to Maine Boats, Homes, and Harbors, you might have seen this picture in the most recent issue. This is the sardine carrier Quick Step, about to be unloaded at the Greens Island Packing Company in Rockland in about 1949. Most of the carriers were company boats, but this one was privately owned by Norman Bickford, who had built her new. She lasted until 1980 when she ran aground at the Brown Cow Ledge. But here she is being launched, and when Don and Maynard were in high school, they got invited by Bert Snow to take a ride down to South Bristol to see her launching, and it was quite a memorable day for the both of them. In this photo, we're seeing a group of men leveling up the lobster boat Seahawk, also at the Snow Marine Basin in 1947. Bert Snow is at the right with Maurice McCusick next to him, and the owner, Lurvy, stands at the left. And here's a young Maynard on his 13th birthday in 1947 with his brand new Schwinn bicycle. That had to be a really good day. A couple more high angle views. This one, another one of the Snow Marine Basin, taken from the pile driver. And it was part of a 3-shot series that, if you did it right, you could stitch them together to become a panorama. This shows the Horatio Cowan's power cruiser, the Nessa, hauled out in the yard with the Quonset hut workshop behind it. The Betty D is on the railway, and Bert Snow's family Chrysler sedan with the roof racks atop, which acted as a towing vehicle. This is Bert Snow and Morris McCusick at work on the catboat Little Adam in the new Suffolk Street tin shop in Rockland. Morris later made this part of his home. They built just this one boat and then joined with Bert's cousin App Storer and another friend, Ralph Cohen, to form the Snow Marine Basin at Lerman's Cove. This is one of my favorite ones from Maynard's early work. It's also, of course, the Snow Marines Basin in 1948, and Russell Stewart's lobster boat is being dragged to her winter location. You see that they're trying to get her through a tight spot between a couple boats, and she's being nudged a bit sideways so the bow wouldn't hit it. What I love about this is that you can see the boys' shadows standing up, peering down on the action and capturing it with their cameras. Wait a moment. Next, we'll go in and look at some of the fishing photos that we have in our collection. We'll start out with the Atlantic fishermen, and I could have shown you scores of photos from both of these collections, but because I have so much to show you, I combined them. Atlantic fishermen was active in 1920 to 1950. It was actually started in Boston in 1919 as a paper for fishermen, the men who actually fish for a living. And in May of 1929, P.G. Lansom, who was president, moved the office to Goffstown, New Hampshire. Lamson continued to publish the magazine, taking his son Gardner Lamson into the business as a correspondent, photographer, and editor. And it was Gardner Lamson that ended up giving us the photos that we have of Atlantic fishermen. The Atlantic fishermen eventually merged with the Maine coast fishermen and the Pacific fishermen to form the National Fishermen. And their photo archive was donated to us maybe 6 years ago, and we recently, maybe 2 years ago, finished digitizing it and getting it online, and it's a huge collection and covers not just the Atlantic, but the whole nation's oceans. Here's an early cover from the Atlantic fishermen. We'll get to see some of Rockland's fishing players from this time period. This is Rodney Thayer, who was known as the Scallop King, with his son Richard at Rockland, Maine plant. Rodney was Maine's commissioner of sea and shore fisheries under the Governor Braun in the 1930s. This person is Morris Helloff of Camden. He was the president of Regal Lobster Company in Rockland. Here he is. You can tell by his jacket with his fur lapel that he didn't do too much of the dirty work, but here he is holding up 2 large live lobsters for the camera. This is Captain Sherman Lord, who is operating the radar on board of the Jacob Pike. The Jacob Pike was a sardine carrier that was owned by the Holmes Packing Company. This photo was taken in 1952, and it's one of a number of Jacob Pike photos we'll see tonight. Jacob Pike is a museum favorite, as the museum briefly owned it, and we had hopes of turning it into a floating museum, but it didn't come to pass. Too much money to raise, but it actually did get purchased by someone who restored it and put it back to work. And I heard that just recently it's been sold again and now is heading from Boothbay up to Canada. So here we're looking at our third McClune vessel. This lobster smack is the AC McClune, and it is being lengthened. So you can see that it's cut in half, and they're adding 11.5 feet to the middle of it. This was in 1951. Just amazing that they could do that. And here, another sardine carrier. This one is the Pauline, similar design to the Jacob Pike. And the Pauline is currently being restored now at up in the Billings Marine in Stonington, where it will be used as an educational vessel. Buzz Scott is the principal behind that, and it will take students and interested people around Penobscot Bay, and also pull up ghost traps and other lost fishing gear. Here we see 4 fishing boats tied up to the wharf in Rockland. We see the Helen May II, the Marietta, the Romley, and the Pandion. This is all behind O'Hara's wharf, which is now where the windjammers are typically wintered. And this is the Victory chimes being towed, and I guess I didn't write down the name of the boat that's towing it, but it's towing it out of Rockland Harbor. Victory chimes, as you probably are aware, is one of part of the windjammer fleet that's still active. Here's a fisherman having a bad day. This is in Rockland in a winter gale. This lobster boat was just 1 year old at the time when it broke free from its mooring and was crashing against the shoreline. We see Stanley Metcalf of the Coast Guard, who struggled for 10 minutes on board this boat, tying on a line so that it could be pulled off the rocks. Unfortunately, it was for naught, because as soon as they got the line attached and began towing it, she started sinking, and they had to cut the tow line, and she eventually drifted back into the breakwater and nearly broke in two. But what a powerful photograph. Here we see retired Coast Guard officer Ken Black of Rockland looking at his collection of lighthouse artifacts. He started the Maine Lighthouse Museum in Rockland, Maine in 1970. So the first 5 or 6 photos that you saw were from the Atlanta fishermen, and now we are looking at national fishermen photos. This one is obviously a national fisherman photo, and this fisherman is Oliver Mahanan of Rockland, and who was a lobster fisherman, reading the very first issue of National Fisherman in 1950. He had a 28-foot lobster boat that had been built in Friendship. He especially liked the classy ads, it was noted as saying. And this is the last one that we'll look at of national fishermen, and this is halibut being unloaded from the Penobscot Gulf in 1987. The Penobscot Gulf was owned at the time by Marty Bartlett, who is a fisherman who still lives in Searsmont and has become a friend of the museum and donated his photo archive here. Though his photos did not include Rockland ones, at least not the ones that we've digitized so far, so you won't get to see his today. This photo was taken by a guy named Chris Cornell, who is also local to this area and had been an editor at National Fisherman. Those are some big halibut in there. So the next collection we'll look at is the Maine Sardine Council, and this is a pretty fun collection. About 2,500 photos, and they were in existence from 1950 to the 1980. And it was a branch of the Department of Agriculture, actually. And it was created to promote the sardine industry. And sardines were, there were more than 300 sardine factories on the coast of Maine at one point in time. Unfortunately, we don't have any anymore. This collection has a lot of images like this, so it would be advertising type images. I don't quite buy it, but it's a great photo. And this collection is especially significant to me because it was in this collection that I discovered about 20 rolls of film taken by Kosti Ruohomaa. And he apparently was hired by the Sardine Council to document the sardine fishery from Weir to Cannes. And he started out at the Dix Island Weir, and here we see the Jacob Pike again at the Weir. And I've met a guy named Bill Buttman who lived out on Dix Island during this time and remembers the day when Kosti came out to photograph. Here they're pursing the seine in the Weir, and this is Bill's dad on the far right. He was able to tell me a lot about what life was like on Dix Island. It sounded pretty magical. And so Kosti went on board the Jacob Pike, rowed it back to Rockland, and then photographed in the Holmes packing plant and photographed the women, primarily the women packing the sardines. And when I discovered that these images were taken by Kosti Ruohomaa, I learned who he was and tracked down a woman named Deanna Bonner-Ganter, who was a curator at the time at the Maine State Museum and had been working on Kosti's biography. And I became quite friendly with her and helped her with her images for her biography on Kosti. And it was at that time that we decided to write a letter to Kosti's photo agency, Black Star. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. Here we see Miss Sardine in front of her giant sardine can next to a guy with a large can opener. A little strange, but funny. Here we see the grayling pulled up at the wharf. You can see the bags of salt on its deck. And one thing that this collection has is a lot of photos from the various packing contests. And this woman that you see here is named Rita Willey, and she's from Rockland. And she became the champion sardine packer. And what an event this must have been to witness. They had chairs set up like it was a concert with several tables up on a stage, and the best packers from each of the various sardine canneries would come down, and they could see who could pack their cans the fastest. They include these close-ups, which I just thought were really great. You can see the fingers are bandaged up. And here she is after she won. Rita has quite the collection of trophies from her various winnings of this unusual pastime. I hope that we can display them here at some point in the future. Here's a picture of Rita with King Neptune. It does look like these contests might have taken place right at the same time as the Lobster Fest. Okay, the next collection we'll look at is Ed Coffin. Ed Coffin was from Nantucket, but moved to Maine after World War II. He was active in World War II, and after the war, he and his wife picked a place on the map to relocate to, and they chose Owl's Head and moved up here in 1949. He was a surveyor and a pilot, and very interested in history, and just essentially adopted the mid-coast Maine as his personal interest and started collecting photographs. His job as a surveyor got him into people's houses where he was able to ask to see photos and borrow them and copy them. And over the years, he came up with more than 30 binders of photographs that he donated to the museum in 2005 or 6. They are all online, and there are quite a few of Rockland. His collection goes from as far south as Booth Bay and as far north as Stockton Springs, and then includes all the islands of Penobscot Bay. So this first shot that we're looking at is an early Main Street Rockland view in 1875, looking south from School Street. Another view of the Thorndike Hotel that you can see right here in the foreground on the left, and the A.A. Sewitt and Company store at left center. Must have been a muddy road back then. Hadn't put the cobblestones in yet. You saw that earlier photo of the Rankin block with the trolleys on it. This goes much earlier than that, when they're actually building out the waterfront. This was 1880, and you can see the crib work piers in the foreground and the Rankin block behind it. This is slightly more modern than it seems. This picture was actually taken around 1920, and it shows Tilson's Wharf looking shoreward from the near end with the construction of the rail line that ran down the pier. It's a fascinating photo, and you can see how they are actually laying the tracks, and the construction workers and their tools. And it's a scene that you wouldn't necessarily think would be worthy of a photo. I mean, how many construction sites do we pass these days, and do we even think about taking a photo? But I'm really glad that they did back then. So here we are looking off the steps of the Samoset. And what a view, looking across the harbor to downtown Rockland. This would have been around 1914. Here's an early view of David Gray's wharf in 1873. You can see that the wharf is piled high with cordwood. And if you look southeast, and you can see over to Crockett's Point, where the lime kiln smokestacks are. Wood was the name of the game in Rockland at this point, and the lime kilns were being fed wood constantly, and coastal schooners would be bringing it up from various places on the coast. Here's an early view of a Rockland lobsterman in his small sloop, lobster in hand. Can't tell if he's about to throw it back out or just taking it out of the trap that's perched on the side of the rail of the boat. Pipe hanging out of his mouth. Quite different than what the lobstermen are using these days. This is a classic Rockland shipbuilding scene, a little more contemporary. This is 1952 at the Snow Marine Basin, and in the frame is Pandion receiving a starboard side plank, and it's Bert Snow on the left and Herbert Thomas on the right. In the background, you can see the schooner Maggie and her yawl boat, the Little Atom. We saw an earlier view in the Eastern collection of the Rockland Thomaston Stone Quarry, but I was really amazed by this photograph and this early engineering feat where they used the stone to make essentially a crude arch supporting the road. Imagine doing that with without all of our modern equipment that we have. Here's that same view from a little bit further back, so you can actually see how it sits in the landscape. Picture's a little blurry, but it's still a neat shot of Captain Richard Snow, who's walking across the ice in the Rockland Harbor in the winter of 1904 to 1905, when a good chunk of the harbor froze. You see these notes handwritten on the bottom of the photo. That was a classic trademark of Ed Coffin. He would research these photos, and he oftentimes would learn one thing and then learn that was incorrect and cross it out and write the right information down. names, dates, places, invaluable stuff to people like me who are trying to preserve this stuff. Photos without names and dates are my nightmare. Now, I could have done this whole show of ship portraits and ship launches taken or collected by Ed. Each one has its own individual characteristics that make it neat, though they are fairly similar. So I didn't want to exclude them, but I also didn't want to make the whole show about them. But we'll go through a few of them rather quickly. This is the three-masted schooner, the Marion N. Cobb, about to be launched at the Cobb and Butler Company Yard in 1902. You can see the big crowd and the horse and wagons and buggies and sleighs. The horse in the foreground is pulling a sleigh. Men up on the rigging. Here's a really dramatic photograph. I just love this point of view. It shows you the sheer size of this ship, which is the six-masted schooner, the Murdy B. Crowley, being launched in 1907. You can see all the passengers up on the bow of the ship as it rides down the ways into the water. Here we see the four-masted schooner, the Freeman, also being launched at the Cobb Butler Yard in 1919. No social distancing going on there. And here the steamship Monhegan being launched, again at the Cobb Butler Shipyard, 1903. These ship launchings were quite a community event. They still are. The five-master Rebecca Palmer being launched in 1901. And this is a three-masted Tarentine being launched at the El Snow Shipyard in 1913. This is just after her launch, actually. And here's a neat photo of the builders that helped make the Tarentine. This construction crew shows 19 men and a boy. And there's a man who's holding a plane. He's third from the left, and that's George Page Blackman. How they knew that person's name, I'm not sure, but you can see the boy in the back row, happy as a clam. This is an amazing feat taking place. You may have heard of the Spite House, which was built in Pittsburgh and moved by barge up to Rockport to Dead Man's Point. This is 1925, and John I. Snow's steamlighter Sophia and the tug Somers N. Smith are here pushing the barge. They had strict instructions not to crack the plaster or damage the chimneys, and they apparently pulled off this feat. What a spectacle. Here it is offloading in Rockport. Notice a little umbrella on the wagon in the foreground. The house is still down there on Dead Man's Point, by the way. And the last image that we'll look at of Ed's collection is another view of the Jacob Pike. This one a little bit more modern. September 1st in 2004 at the North End Shipyard in Rockland, getting an overhaul. She should become Rockland's namesake boat, in my opinion. Next collection is Everett Red Boudelier. Another big collection, 25,000 some photographs taken between 1960 and 1990. Ed was a photojournalist, and he would take his own photos using a Speed Graflex, which is the old style press camera. He would leave a trail of flash bulbs in his wake, from what I was told. And he haunted the boatyards of the mid-coast. He actually got into photography by photographing horse races in Saratoga Springs. But he liked to be on the water. He sailed as a young man on a Gloucester fishing schooner, Elsie, that was based out of Nova Scotia. He died at the age of 85 in 2003, and his collection came to us through his son. So I know that you thought I would immediately start into more boat photos, but I thought I'd throw a curveball in here. And Ed was just a lover of life and lover of things that people did, and quilt making was no exception. This is a group of Rockland women, Rockland and Bremen women, who would gather to make these quilts. This quilt is in progress, and it includes the names of Cynthia Wass, Evangeline Sylvester, and Gladys Tolman. When the quilt was finished, they would toss it over the head of the new owner, who in this case was Mrs. Theodore Sylvester Sr. of Rockland. But what a fun photo. But enough of the quilts, we'll go back to the boats. And yet again, Jacob Pike, alongside O'Hara's Fish Pier in May of 1987. Dick Lindahl was the captain at this time. The Jacob Pike was built by Newbert and Wallace in 1949. Here we see the Louis R. French under sail right off the Rockland breakwater. This is July 5th of 1985. They must have had Windjammer days or something like that going on in Rockland at the time, and you can see the huge crowd gathered around the lighthouse out on the breakwater. This is the crew of the Louis R. French, or some of the crew. We have Captain John Foss on the far left, the cook Jane Arbuckles, deckhands Bill Keefe, and Neil Parker. This was taken in July of 1977. And here's another shot of the Louis R. French crew. I like this one. It looks kind of like a rock album cover. But we see Linda Lee on the far left, Ronald Lee, the brother, Captain Havelai Hawkins the second, and then Captain Havelai Hawkins the first on the far right. This also would have been taken around 1977 or 1978. Here we see the famous local captain, Doug Lee, aboard the Isaac Evans during a schooner race in July of 1978. Looks like he's having a good day. Classic shot. And here's Doug and Linda's creation, the Heritage, right when they're taking apart the her shed that she was built in. So they're tearing down the shed. This is at the North End Shipyard. She was not a replica ship, but rather, as the Lees like to describe her, the next generation of coasting schooner, designed specifically with passenger comfort and safety in mind. It was designed by Captains Doug and Linda, and it took a year of planning and 4 years of construction. And they couldn't really work on it during the summer because they would be sailing the other windjammers, which helped drag out the finish date, but they did get it done. Here we see them with Captain John Foss, and Doug has his daughter Clara on his shoulders, and Linda has holding her other daughter Rachel. And Red did shoot in color sometimes, also with his Speed Graphics, so they're large format color transparencies. Here we see the Heritage on the Ways on April 16th of 1983 with the big crowd to see her off. Here's a look at the North End Shipyard, and you can see the tops of the lime kilns in the background. The North End Shipyard was the last site that had active lime kilns. The cars kind of date it to be the 1970s, it looks like. I don't have an exact date here. Actually, 1977. Another view that shows the lime kilns a little better. And for the last couple pictures of Red, we will again look at some sardine photos. The next three photos were all taken inside of the Green Island Sardine Processing Plant, and all were taken in June of 1962. In this photo, we see Grace Emerson of Rockland and Jeannie Alworld also of Rockland. They're both veteran employees of Green, having worked there for more than 20 years. This woman is Mrs. Inez Grand of Rockland. She worked for the Green Island Fish Company for more than 35 years. She's 74 years old in this photograph. She makes $74.25 a week during this time. Here's the last one. This is Pearl Van Ors of Rockland, packing cans for packing sardines for 8 years. She's the mother of 7 children, aged 4 to 24, and a grandmother of 3 children. She earned $153 a week, working 63 hours. She can pack 4 cases an hour, and there's 100 cans in a case. So every hour she was packing 400 sardine cans. Amazing. Oh, so this is the last photo of Rockland, and it's of the White Hawk just before launch when it's still on the ways. A great photo of a really beautiful schooner. And we'll close out the show with the Kosti Ruohomaa collection. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Kosti and his work, but Kosti, he was born in Vermont, but as a young child, he moved to Maine, to Rockland with his parents, where they bought a farm up on Dodge Mountain and grew blueberries. Kosti attended Rockland High School and went on to art school, much to his father's dismay, who was hoping he would take over the blueberry farm, but Kosti didn't really see that was fit for him. He was very artistic, and he actually won a contest that enabled him to go out and work for Disney, and he worked in Disney studios and worked on the films, including Fantasia, working in the effects department. It was around that time that he picked up his first camera and found that he had a knack for it, and eventually moved back to New York and got a job working for the photo agency called Black Star. His first job for Black Star resulted in a cover of Life magazine, and he was off to the races at that point. So this collection I started to tell you earlier came to the museum in 2017 after we wrote a letter to Black Star and asked if they would let Kosti come home, and much to our surprise, they did. And we've been hard at work, first organizing it and fundraising, and now digitizing and cataloging. A big shout out of thanks to Linda and Diana Bean, who are the main funders for this project, but also the McAvoy Foundation and the Wyeth Foundation, who also have contributed to our work on this collection. The collection is huge, and it's broken down by assignments. So we have various manila envelopes that will contain all the photos and notes and contact sheets for each of Kosti's assignments. And that is the way that we are actually digitizing the collection, doing it assignment by assignment. And so now we have about a dozen assignments live on our website now that you can see, and the photos that I'm going to show you are drawn from them, and they are Rockland photos. This is Kosti sitting in the little cabin that his father built when they first moved to Dodge Mountain while they were building the farmhouse. So his family lived in this building while they built the farmhouse and barn, and then Kosti came back and it was essentially his bachelor pad. So the first, we're going to look at small groups of images from several different assignments. And the first one we're going to look at is that of Miss Doris McDougall, who was the principal of McLean Grammar School in Rockland. This was a series that Kosti photographed that turned into a newspaper or a magazine article in Pageant magazine in 1951. And the title of the article was Your Children's Other Mother. And here we see Miss McDougall grading papers. And this is the McLean School. I suspect that this photo shoot lasted a couple days, and many of the photos were set up or staged to some extent. Here we see Miss McDougall with some of her students gathered around her. According to Kosti's caption for this image, the children were reading from If I Were Going, which was part of the Alice and Jerry series, which follows a sister and brother and their dog, Jip, through a series of adventures. These students are third graders. And here we see them out in the schoolyard playing snowball. And you can see Miss McDougall kind of supervising it to make sure it doesn't get too rowdy and that no physical mayhem takes place. The amazing thing about this collection is that as famous as Kosti is, and so many of his images are well known, most people are only familiar with his published work, and the rest have really never been seen by anyone but himself and the editors at Black Star or Life magazine or whatever magazine he was photographing for at the time. Here we see a young girl singing or presenting before the PTA meeting. And I have just recently heard from this girl's daughter. And the series, the assignment follows Miss McDougall home, where you see her cleaning up around the house while her husband, who is also a school teacher, relaxes and reads the paper. There's other pictures of her cooking dinner. And I love how the series ends with her kind of collapsed on the couch with the caption of, "After a long, hard day, Miss McDougall finds time to relax." Next to the radio, of course. The next assignment we'll take a look at is of one of the lobster fests. And he took scores of images at this particular lobster fest, which would have been in 1952. And only two of the photos were ever actually used in Life magazine in the August 18th issue. These kids are having a pie eating contest. This was the winner. One of the things that we're hoping is, as more of these images get out, that people will be able to identify many of our local people, and many of them should still be around and with us, though much older than they were when these photos were taken. And he just kind of roamed around the Lobster Fest and captured the activities. And he had such a knack for photographing people. And you would see in his work how someone would attract his attention, and he would work the photo. And one of the images would typically stand out above the rest and be a quote unquote a select. But he just had this way of composing portraits that were natural, but eye-catching and strong. The Lobster King, the Lobster Queen, and King Neptune. Apparently 30,000 lobsters were consumed during this yearly event. You see the parade coming up Main Street. A woman feeding a clam to her son. A young Sylvester Stallone. Just kidding. A young child who's missing out on the action as the parade goes by. The man on the left is Governor Frederick Payne, who stopped in to enjoy the festivities. We don't know who the man in the pinstripe suit is, but it's a pretty nice suit. I hope they don't drip any butter on it. An elderly man eating his lobster down by the water. A couple of drunken sailors making fools out of themselves. They've apparently attracted a crowd around them who are enjoying their antics. Next assignment we're going to look at is when Richard Nixon, who was running for vice president along with Dwight Eisenhower in 1952, he came to Maine to campaign, and one of his stops, well, he landed in Waterville and met with Maine politicians, including Margaret Chase Smith and Governor Payne, and then made his way from Waterville to Skowhegan to Pittsfield to Bangor and then to Rockland, where he visited the fair and the lobster pound and other local sites. It doesn't seem that any of Kosti's photos of Nixon were ever published. At least we haven't found them yet in a printed form. A great photo of future president and his wife learning about lobster from a lobster dealer. Here he is addressing a crowd. The next one we're going to take a look at is a group of children that are partaking in a lobster eating contest. Now, this was not at the Lobster Fest. This was actually before it. This is at the Rockland Community Building, and young boys and young girls gathered, and essentially it was a kind of like a playoff to see who would be. They would essentially be judged, and the 4 finalists of each group would then compete against each other at the Lobster Fest. It's a quite an amusing series. And these guys are the judges who were all involved in the lobster business. They included Fred Gatcombe, Dick Thayer, and Harold and Carl Simmons. So the big cigar in the man's hand on the left. And these last few photos that we'll look at are taken up at Dodge Mountain, and this was the Ruohomaa homestead and barn. Looking down over the fields down to the bay and the city of Rockland. Kosti took scores of photos from this vantage point in all types of weather and at night. He also did a pretty good job documenting the family's blueberry business. You see them here picking blueberries. They're using the winnowing machine to remove the leaves and stems. And this was mostly a family and friends run business. Some of those gorgeous views looking down from the mountain. That's Kosti sitting on the step on the front on the left, and he's sitting next to his parents, his father Salim and his mother Sophia. And those are his aunts and an uncle on the back steps. They were all Finnish, from Finland, and there were quite a few Finnish people that lived in the area then, and they felt very much at home. I don't know who this is, but it's just a great portrait. There's his father, who was often a subject, standing in the entryway of the barn. You see many pictures of him walking into and out of the barn in fog and in the morning and at night. Lanterns. This is a self-portrait that Kosti set up to photograph himself with the bucket standing in the doorway, and that really creates a dramatic effect as the light streams through, streams out of the barn and silhouettes him holding a pail and a lantern. It's kind of a magical photo. Walking back from the barn in the fog. One of his favorite environmental effects was fog. He found it very mysterious and loved it. So this is my last image that I'm going to share with you tonight. If you have any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. I would, again, encourage you to come see us this summer. But in the meantime, keep in touch, check out our online offerings, and come visit.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Kevin. We have time for 1 or 2 quick questions. If you have a question when no one else is speaking, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask yourself. Or if you prefer, you can type them into the chat and I'll read them aloud for you. Andrea asks, where is the church in the last image there?
Not in Rockland. It's in Virginia somewhere, actually. I just thought it was a great closing image and wanted to include it. But if you send me an email, I can tell you specifically where it was.
Jim in the chat asks, he says, Nixon had some white splotches on his lapel in one of those photos. Was that a photo glitch or perhaps something from a gull?
It could be either, frankly, but I suspect maybe from a gull, appropriately.
Excellent. I think that'll do it. Well, thank you so much to Kevin for a really wonderful talk, and thank you to everyone for coming out tonight. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you, Em, and thank you, everyone.